We're grateful for each and every one of you. Let us know where in the world you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let's begin. The crystal glasses clinked under the soft glow of chandeliers as Cynthia leaned in closer to Victor, her so-called business partner. Her hand lingered on his wrist longer than polite conversation required, her laugh spilling into the private dining room like perfume. Jonathan sat across the table, watching in silence, his fork resting untouched on the plate. It wasn't the first time he had seen it. The sideways glances, the late-night text messages she thought he couldn't hear vibrating against the nightstand, the hush phone calls outside on the patio. Tonight, though, she had crossed an invisible line. This wasn't subtle flirtation. This was a performance. She wanted him to notice, to feel small. Cynthia had mastered the art of living two lives. To Jonathan, she was still the wife who accepted anniversary gifts with a thin smile, who posed beside him at family dinners pretending everything was intact. But to her friends, the Melanies, the Gregs, the Claudias, she painted him as a burden. A man who didn't measure up, who drove a car not fit for a circle, who still carried the habits of a quiet, working-class background. Jonathan had tolerated the humiliation before, but tonight, her cruelty gleamed sharper than the silverware. She wasn't just betraying him behind closed doors. She was dismantling him in public, brick by brick, until nothing remained of the man she once promised to cherish. Jonathan, Melanie sneered, swirling her martini. How do you put up with Cynthia? She deserves someone who can keep up with her pace. Cynthia laughed, a low, deliberate laugh. Oh, don't pity him, she said, brushing Victor's sleeve as if Jonathan wasn't even sitting there. He's comfortable being average. The table erupted in shallow chuckles, but Jonathan didn't flinch. He didn't break eye contact. His stillness unnerved Victor, who quickly reached for his drink as if to avoid the weight in Jonathan's stare. Inside, though, Jonathan was burning. He remembered when Cynthia's eyes once softened at his touch, when she used to dream with him about building a life, when they used to walk hand in hand through grocery aisles, joking about which pasta brand was classier. That woman was gone, replaced by someone intoxicated with status and empty validation. But Jonathan had been preparing for this moment. Every betrayal, every insult, every dismissive laugh had been noted, stored, and weighed. He had built a life behind the curtain, investments, holdings, and influence Cynthia had no idea about because she never cared to ask. And now, her disdain had handed him the perfect stage. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply set down his napkin, pushed back his chair, and looked at her one last time. Enjoy your company, Cynthia, he said quietly. You'll need them more than ever. Then he walked out, leaving her laughing nervously to cover the sting of his words. But inside, a chill crawled up her spine. She had no idea that his silence was the sound of the ground shifting beneath her feet. Because Jonathan wasn't leaving in defeat. He was leaving to begin. Jonathan's footsteps echoed down the quiet street that night, his mind sharper than the cold air biting against his skin. Most men would have exploded at the dinner table, maybe even made a scene, but Jonathan wasn't most men. Rage wasn't his weapon. Strategy was. Every calculated silence, every calm departure, was part of a blueprint he had been sketching for years. He had once lived for Cynthia's approval. Back when they first married, he worked extra hours just to surprise her with small luxuries. Flowers, weekend getaways, little notes tucked into her purse. She loved those things at first, or at least she pretended to. But once she tasted the circles of prestige, the charity luncheons, the country clubs, his gestures weren't enough anymore. She started comparing him to her friends' husbands, men with flashier cars, louder wallets, and reputations built on showing off. That was when Victor appeared. At first, he was just a name Jonathan heard tossed around, Victor this, Victor that, always tied to some new project Cynthia claimed she was working on. Then Jonathan noticed the hours she spent on her phone late at night, smiling at texts she wouldn't let him see. He noticed the perfume on her when she returned from business meetings, the kind she never wore for him anymore. Jonathan had confronted her once, years ago, asking directly if there was someone else. She had looked him dead in the eyes and laughed. A cruel, dismissive laugh. You're imagining things, she said. Don't be insecure, Jonathan. Victor respects me. Unlike you. Those words were designed to cut, and they did. But instead of fighting, he withdrew. He stopped giving her the satisfaction of his hurt and began building a different plan. While Cynthia played hostess in her new world, Jonathan quietly expanded his own. By day, he lived simply. His 2014 Lexus, his coffee at the same corner cafe, his khakis she mocked so often. By night, he managed investments through trusts Cynthia never knew existed. Real estate, stock portfolios, silent partnerships in businesses she frequented but never connected back to him. He had grown up understanding discretion, taught by adoptive parents who valued legacy over showmanship. To Cynthia, he was average. To the circles that truly mattered, he was untouchable. But Jonathan's revenge wasn't about proving his wealth. It was about exposing Cynthia for what she had become, a woman who traded love for attention, loyalty for vanity, and marriage vows for whispered meetings with Victor. He began with silence. After walking out of that dinner, he didn't call, didn't text, didn't explain. He let her stew in confusion, let her friends speculate. Cynthia told him he was sulking, maybe even embarrassed. She spun it as proof of his weakness. Victor laughed at her jokes, held her arm, and played the part of the man she thought she deserved. What neither of them knew was that Jonathan already had the evidence he needed. The hotel receipts, the photos of Cynthia and Victor slipping into boutique lounges out of town, the trail of messages Jonathan's quiet investigators had compiled over months. He never confronted her because confrontation would have given her control. No, Jonathan preferred precision. His daily routine continued as if nothing had changed. He went for his morning runs along the coast, stopped at the same cafe where the barista knew his order, and returned to his office to manage operations no one connected to him. But behind that calm exterior, he was weaving Cynthia's downfall into every layer of her carefully curated life. The first shift was subtle. Cynthia's social club, the one she flaunted on her Instagram, suddenly restructured their guest list. She brushed it off, told Victor it was a clerical error. But Jonathan knew better. He had pulled the string quietly. A week later, the boutique where she shopped for designer gowns stopped extending her private discounts. Another system error. Then the charity board she adored announced new leadership, and her name was absent. At home, the distance grew louder. Cynthia tried to bait him, mocking his car, sneering at his frugal habits, dropping hints about how Victor could give her more. Jonathan didn't bite. He came home late, unreadable, kissed her on the cheek with the same neutrality he would show a stranger. His calm terrified her more than shouting ever could. Victor, smug in his role as Cynthia's secret confidant, urged her to consider leaving Jonathan. "He's holding you back," Victor whispered one night as they sat in his penthouse suite. "With me, you'd never have to worry about being embarrassed again." Cynthia smiled, imagining the glamorous life Victor promised. What she didn't know was that Jonathan already knew about that night too. He had eyes everywhere, and each betrayal was another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. Jonathan's revenge wasn't about rage. It was about letting her destroy herself while he orchestrated the stage. And soon, that stage would collapse under her stilettos, leaving her with nothing but the echo of the laughter she once used to humiliate him. Because Jonathan Morgan didn't shout. He didn't slam doors. He built walls so high that by the time Cynthia realized she was trapped outside of them, there would be no way back in. And as he sipped his coffee the next morning, flipping through the financial pages like any ordinary man, he smiled faintly. The game had begun. Cynthia's mornings once began with invitations buzzing on her phone, luncheons, charity events, spa openings. She thrived on being seen, photographed, praised. But now, her mornings were eerily quiet. No new notifications, no text from her so-called friends confirming brunch plans. The silence gnawed at her, though she refused to admit it aloud. She poured herself a glass of orange juice and scrolled through social media, desperately searching for proof she still mattered. That's when she saw it. Photos from a gala she swore she had been confirmed for. Melanie and Claudia were there, smiling with their husbands, champagne in hand. Cynthia wasn't just absent. She wasn't even mentioned. No tags. No trace. Her chest tightened. She dialed Melanie immediately. After 3 rings, the call clicked to voicemail. She tried Claudia. Straight to voicemail. Victor finally picked up, but even he sounded distracted. Don't worry about those events, he said smoothly. They're not worth your time. I'll take you somewhere better this weekend. But Cynthia's pride was wounded. She had built her entire image on being part of that circle. If she wasn't in the photos, she didn't exist. She didn't realize that Jonathan's strings were pulling tighter each day, weaving a net around her. That week, another blow landed. Her yoga studio, the one where she posted endless photos of herself in branded athletic wear, suddenly revoked her honorary membership. The receptionist smiled apologetically. I'm sorry, Ms. Renford. You'll need to reapply under our new policy. The word stung worse than a slap. She stormed out, her cheeks burning, convinced it was a mistake. By the time she got home, Victor was sitting at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone. Rough day, he asked casually. Something's going on, Cynthia snapped. They're excluding me. First the gala, then the studio. Do you think Jonathan? She cut herself off, biting her lip. Victor raised a brow. What about Jonathan? She shook her head quickly. Nothing. He's not capable of this. He's ordinary. But deep down, the thought lingered. Jonathan's silence wasn't weakness. It was deliberate. She replayed his calm words from that night at dinner. Enjoy your company, Cynthia. You'll need them more than ever. The way he said it still haunted her. Meanwhile, Jonathan's life flowed with quiet precision. He kept his routines, rising at dawn, running the same coastal path, nodding at neighbors who assumed he was just another middle-aged man keeping fit. At his office, he signed documents that sealed Cynthia's fate without her ever knowing his hand was behind it. He had learned patience from years of being overlooked. And now, patience was his greatest weapon. One evening, Cynthia decided to confront him. She waited in the living room, arms crossed, rehearsing accusations. When Jonathan walked in, she snapped, Are you enjoying this? Watching me get cut out? Because I know you're behind it. Jonathan set his keys on the table, met her gaze, and simply said, You finally noticed. Her stomach dropped. So you admit it? He didn't flinch. I don't need to admit anything. The truth doesn't require my words. You built this life on appearances, Cynthia. I only removed the stage you stood on. Her voice trembled, part anger, part fear. You're destroying me. No, he said, his tone steady. You destroyed us a long time ago. I'm just letting the world see who you really are. She wanted to scream, to throw something, but the calm certainty in his voice froze her. For the first time, Cynthia realized she wasn't dealing with the passive man she thought she controlled. She was dealing with someone who had been waiting, watching, preparing. That night, Cynthia couldn't sleep. She tossed in bed, her mind racing through memories. Moments when Jonathan had quietly paid for things, moments she dismissed as trivial. His insistence on keeping certain finances separate, his late nights, working, his reserved manner at social events. She used to mock those things. Now, she saw them for what they were. Layers of a life she had never bothered to understand. Days later, the unraveling accelerated. Victor suddenly grew distant, his calls less frequent. When Cynthia pressed him, he admitted sheepishly that some of his own project had unexpected setbacks. Investors were pulling out. He didn't say who the investors were, but Jonathan already knew. The final humiliation came at a dinner hosted by Claudia. Cynthia, desperate to cling to her fading circle, arrived in her finest dress. But the moment she walked in, conversations hushed. No one greeted her warmly. No one offered her a drink. When she approached Melanie, the woman gave a forced smile and whispered, Maybe you should leave before it gets awkward. Cynthia's face burned with humiliation. Awkward? I'm your friend. Melanie shook her head. Not anymore. You've been flagged. No one wants the fallout. The words echoed like a gavel. Cynthia fled the dinner, her heels clattering on the pavement as tears stung her eyes. For the first time, she felt the weight of true isolation. Back home, Jonathan sat in the dimly lit kitchen, reading a book, his calm presence like a ghost haunting her. She glared at him, her voice breaking. You wanted this. You planned this. He closed the book slowly, met her eyes, and said, No, Cynthia, you planned at the moment you chose him over us. I just built the walls you're now trapped outside of. The silence that followed was worse than any shouting match, because deep down, Cynthia knew he was right. The house felt colder now, not because of the weather, but because Cynthia no longer recognized it as her own. Every detail, the polished marble counters, the framed photographs, even the quiet hum of the refrigerator, reminded her of a life built on Jonathan's steady shoulders. For years she had mocked his simplicity, believing her worth came from her circle, her appearances, and Victor's charm. Now, all of it was crumbling, and Jonathan hadn't raised his voice once. The breaking point arrived one afternoon when Cynthia's father called. He rarely phoned her, preferring to keep conversations short and polite. But this time his voice was sharp. "Cynthia, what did you do? Your name is being dragged through every club and committee in the city. People are saying you disrespected Jonathan, that you mocked him publicly. Do you have any idea what kind of man you married?" Her stomach twisted. "Dad, you don't understand. Jonathan isn't who they think." But her father cut her off. "He's more powerful than you ever gave him credit for. Do you know what the Morgan name means? Do you know how many organizations are tied to his family? You've embarrassed yourself. And worse, you've embarrassed us." The line went dead before she could respond. Cynthia sat frozen, the phone trembling in her hand. It was the first time her father had spoken to her with such disdain. She wasn't just losing friends now. She was losing family respect, the very thing she once weaponized against Jonathan. Meanwhile, Jonathan carried on as though nothing had changed. He still rose early, made his coffee black, and read his paper in silence. But now, Cynthia noticed how others treated him. The neighbor across the street greeted him warmly, deferentially. The banker who once ignored Jonathan's modest car now rushed to shake his hand. Even the barista at the cafe seemed nervous when Jonathan stepped in, whispering, "Mr. Morgan," instead of Jonathan. It hit her like a thunderclap. Jonathan had never been ordinary. He had simply chosen not to flaunt what he had. She had mistaken humility for weakness. Cynthia tried clinging to Victor for support, but his mask slipped quickly. One night, he called her with a tone she'd never heard before, distant, clipped. "Listen, Cynthia, we need to cool things off. Investors are pulling away. People are saying you're toxic for my brand. I can't have this heat on me." Her heart sank. "Victor, you promised." "I didn't promise anything," he interrupted. "You're on your own. Good luck." The line went dead, leaving Cynthia staring into the darkness of her bedroom, realizing she had traded a husband's devotion for a hollow fling that vanished the moment pressure hit. Jonathan, however, didn't gloat. That was never his way. His revenge wasn't loud. It was architectural, built brick by brick, dismantling everything she valued until only truth remained. The final blow came weeks later at a charity auction Cynthia once chaired. She dressed in her finest gown, desperate to reclaim some dignity, and walked into the hall determined to prove she still belonged. Heads turned, not with admiration, but with pity. Conversations hushed as she approached. At the center of the room stood Jonathan, calm and commanding. The host introduced him as our most generous benefactor, Mr. Jonathan Morgan. Applause erupted. He nodded politely, his eyes scanning the room before they landed on Cynthia. For a fleeting second, she thought he might acknowledge her. Instead, he turned his back, continuing his conversation with the mayor. Cynthia's cheeks burned as whispers spread. She tried approaching a group of women she once called friends, but they shifted away, their smiles strained. One finally said what they were all thinking. "Cynthia, you should go. This isn't your place anymore." Her knees wobbled. She stumbled outside, the cold night air biting her skin. Tears threatened, but none came. She had wasted them all on vanity and lies. For the first time in her life, Cynthia felt invisible. Back at home, she found Jonathan waiting at the kitchen table, his posture calm as ever. On the counter sat a single envelope with her name on it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a simple note written in Jonathan's steady handwriting. "For every silent insult, there is a silent response. You chose betrayal. I chose freedom. JM." Beneath the note was a set of divorce papers, neatly stacked, with Jonathan's signature already in place. Cynthia's breath caught in her throat. She looked up at him, desperate. "Jonathan, please. I can change. I didn't mean." He shook his head gently. "No, Cynthia. You meant every laugh, every insult, every night you gave to Victor instead of to us. This isn't punishment. It's clarity. You wanted a life without me. Now you have it." Her lip trembled. I'll be nothing without you. Jonathan's eyes softened, but his voice stayed firm. You were nothing with me because you chose to be. And that's the difference. He stood, picked up his jacket, and walked out. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just silence, the same silence he had always used as his weapon. Cynthia sank to the floor, the papers trembling in her hands. The house, once a symbol of success, now felt like a cage. Every wall reminded her that she had been living in Jonathan's world the whole time, mistaking his humility for weakness, never realizing she was standing on the foundation of his power. The man she mocked had given her everything, and with a quiet stroke of a pen, he had taken it all back. And as the door closed behind him, Cynthia finally understood. Jonathan's revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was final.